When I began architectural training around 50 years ago, modernism had peaked and was on the decline. While the mid-century modernist masters were still envied and taught, we were directed more towards the subtle use of tumbled bricks, mission brown paint and macrame wall hangings. Fortunately, many of those fascinating buildings survived the new fashion trends, and today we have a guest speaker who will share his passion for modernist architecture and reveal some of Adelaide's hidden gems. Please welcome Stuart Symons.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you very much to the Rotary Club for having me along today. And a quick apology, I know we've had to reschedule this one once or twice, so I'm glad we're finally able to be here today. I'd certainly like to also acknowledge we're meeting on the traditional land of the Kaurna people and pay my respects to elders past and present and any traditional owners joining us today. I started Modernist Adelaide a couple of years ago to celebrate, I guess, Adelaide's mid-century architecture. So a lot of the architecture from, say, the 1940s to the 1970s through regular tours like this one, and also other activities like exhibitions, publications, events, and online, harnessing the power of social media, I guess, to create a community around this. Modernist Adelaide is really about bringing our city streets to life and engaging the community on a large scale about our architectural heritage. It's the only program of regular monthly architecture tours in the city, and the only one that's focused on a really quite remarkable legacy of post-war buildings and their architects. And until now, I feel that's largely been overlooked and not well understood outside immediate professional circles of architecture or perhaps academic circles as well. I guess, so what am I talking about when I talk about modernism? It really has been at the heart of, I think, the physical, cultural and social transformation of post-war Adelaide. And it's a term that's used for a group of styles that emerged in the first half of the 20th century, but really became dominant after World War II. And a lot of it was about new technologies. It was based on new technologies of construction, such as the use of glass and steel and reinforced concrete and materials like that became more economical to use, but also philosophically from a desire by architects to break away from historical architectural styles and design buildings that were much more functional and honest about their purpose rather than being decorative or ornamental or, to their minds, regurgitating the past. And certainly that was a real shift from traditional training in architecture, what was known at the time of the Beaux-Arts kind of movement of training in architecture, where you basically learnt to replicate classical styles or Georgian styles or whatever. This was something of a revolution of doing things very differently and using design to create a better future. In a domestic setting, so with houses, you often see with this kind of architecture really careful siting and orientation of the house on the block to make the most of the natural environment, and particularly the use of the sun. Open planning and really considerable use of glass and a focus on creating a harmony between inside and outside. I love this quote. This is a quote from a wonderful South Australian architect who only just passed away a week or two ago, Newell Platten. And this, to me, really encapsulates this idea of it really being a revolution and out with the authority of history and style and in with freedom to invent and explore new technologies, open up houses to lights and views and build for everyone, and having good design for everyone, not just those who could afford it. So it was a real fervour of a movement at that time. So I feel that by sharing the stories and the designs and a lot of the people behind these buildings, I really hope Modernist Adelaide encourages more people to look up, as these people are doing, to really build awareness and appreciation and a sense of pride in Adelaide's modernist architecture from this period. And hopefully that in turn, of course, that appreciation can then lead to preservation. And I guess that's what Modernist Adelaide is all about as well. It's brought thousands of visitors into Adelaide for the love of our architecture, and it's taken our architectural heritage to Australia and the world through a groundbreaking book, the first of its kind, and also through a large and really highly engaged online community. So more than 1,200 people have attended 50 of these Modernist Adelaide walking tours in the city of Adelaide. And as well as that, I do quite regular house tours as well, which is where I first met Heidi on one of these tours. So one of my all-time favourites, this is the tour of Keith Neighbour's house in Torrens Park. He would have been a contemporary of Platten's. This one was from 1958. We've also toured the Marinov House in Beaumont in Pam Street, designed by a young Jeff Nairn, as well as the Sims House, which is just around the corner in Beaumont, designed by Ian Hannaford. And then just up the road again, this is all from an enclave of houses in Beaumont that are extraordinary and by a number of really significant architects of the post-war time. This was the Rotor House, designed by Pamela Opie for Justice John Rotor, who was of course a legal partner with our former Premier Don Dunstan. So this was a notorious party house back in the day where the Don Dunstan was known for arriving in his pink shorts and standing on the back terrace overlooking the garden and tossing oyster shells into the garden with a glass of champagne in hand. So it was definitely all about the good life back then. This is another wonderful house, the Jarrow House in Fitzroy, tucked away in the back streets there, designed by a Czech emigre, Joseph Jarosek, with Duncan Muirhead of Muirhead Thompson and Associates. And another great one that we've done was my house would have really, just sold, which was the Lappans House from 1966, which is a project home, which Vladis has been to for one of our events there. Which was this one, where my wife's a cabaret performer, Michelle Pearson, so we thought we'd combine the two passions and had a dinner and a show and an architecture tour, and so we had a wonderful cabaret dinner party that also celebrated modernist architecture, which was a great night. So more than 400 people have attended 20 of these house tours as well, as a wonderful way to sort of get an appreciation for these kind of buildings that you might not otherwise, and it's certainly very generous of the owners to open up their doors in this kind of way. Another thing that I've been doing over this time is engaging people, am I going to head too far? No, sorry, through a book which I published a couple of years ago. So really taking a couple of years research and visiting and photographing and digging through lots of old archival material, interviewing people, which is often the case, to pull all that together in this book, Modernist Adelaide, which looks at 100 buildings from this period, from the 1940s to the 1970s. It's the first large-scale survey of this period of architecture, and certainly one that I'm quite proud of. Rather kindly, Kevin McLeod, the Grand Designs host, got his hands on a copy, and he's been very generous in his praise of it, which is really kind of him. It's a fully referenced book that showcases a number of these different buildings, and I guess it's sort of part coffee table book, part guide book. So it's designed to be, really accessible. And I am selling copies here afterwards if anyone's interested. Very happy you can buy a copy here for the cheapest you'll be able to get it compared to the bookstores. I guess we're better to launch it than a classic Modernist Adelaide building here in Adelaide, which is now a cafe known as Crack Kitchen on Franklin Street. But that's in the premises of a former Bank of Adelaide branch, the Post Office Bank of Adelaide branch, that was designed by E.H. McLachlan Harris in 1953. And you can see there, you can get a hint of some of these traits of like big windows and the use of steel casement windows and much more open space and light as well. And more than 1,000 copies of the book have been sold here and nationally and internationally, and it was nice to get more than 100 people at the launch. So you can sort of see over time, incrementally, these different bits and pieces of tours and the book and speaking and so on has really built up quite large numbers of people engaging around this material. I've also collaborated with the same venue, Crack Kitchen, on an exhibition of photographs of this period of architecture of mine that was held during the Sala Festival a couple of years ago, and that was hosted over a course of a month. And so again, it's a free exhibition where people could come and see and sort of learn a bit more about these buildings and perhaps in a different kind of light at Crack Kitchen as well. And it was really kind of them to host that. And again, another great opening event. And that had 7,500 people attended that exhibition over the course of just coming to that cafe over the course of a month. So a great way again to spread that word and just bring people into the city and build understanding of the buildings that we have around us that sometimes we walk past every day. Another big part of spreading the good word, I guess, is through presentations like this. So I really do appreciate the invitation to come and speak with you and share a bit about this today. I've done similar ones, longer ones. Thankfully, I'll keep this one shorter, at places like Odessa and Lee Street here, where they had a fabulous exhibition a couple of years ago about Adelaide's modernist architecture. We were fortunate to have a panel discussion there with a few people who've worked through that period. So people like Lou Balsamo from Hassels, Adrian Evans as well, from the Public Buildings Department initially, and later JPE, and also Rob Cheeseman, very successful architect in his own right and son of Jack Cheeseman, who absolutely was a founding father of this period of architecture going back to the 1930s. Also done another one here at the wonderful Arkabar, Dixon and Platten's masterpiece, easily sort of overlooked these days with lots of TUI's extra dry signs and TV screens everywhere, but if you can kind of strip that away, underneath that is quite an extraordinary piece of, I guess, regional Adelaide modernism there, with its use of exposed materials and timber and red brick and strawboard ceilings and fabulous little brick booths and so on. It's a great building to sort of take that in and take a second look at some of the things that we might sort of sometimes take for granted. And probably a highlight was actually taking this to London, where I was there just over two years ago, speaking at the London Festival of Architecture, and the South Australian Government's Agent General over there very kindly hosted me in Australia House here on the Strand to talk a bit about that as well. So that was an absolute treat. And really, across those presentations, more than 400 people have attended. Many are here and many right here in the city of Adelaide. And I'm really passionate about, most of this activity happening right here in the city. The house tours obviously are a little bit different, but certainly in terms of a lot of these other things, for me, it's really about bringing people into the city and really, really appreciating what we're doing here. One other platform for that is the media, of course, and been fortunate to have a number of opportunities to talk about our wonderful architecture here through the media. So a number of examples here, things like the SA Weekender ran a piece on it, but all the main sort of like media that we have here, like the ABC and in Daily and the Tiser and Adelaide Review, have all been pretty generous in helping profile what we're doing and raise that awareness as well. Probably more than 20 articles in total over the last couple of years. And that does really help, again, build that profile for people who might not otherwise have really taken much of a look at this kind of thing. It just makes sure you don't read the comments. That's always a bit depressing, but it's great to see that sort of stuff out there. And I guess the final piece of the puzzle with all of this activity is really harnessing the power of social media and technology. And it's actually where it started. So Modernist Adelaide initially started with me taking street photography in a way, and then of some of our buildings, and being intrigued by that and sharing that through things like Instagram and Facebook, along with a bit of research about who designed this and who it was for and when it was done and so on. And through those platforms have really built up a really strong and engaged community over time. And then that, of course, feeds into people coming to tours or buying the book or coming to events like this as well. It's also a really great way to spread that word about our architecture outside of Adelaide. So a lot of people discover this through online, and so you get great interstate visitation. So heritage tourism of people who actually, as part of their plans to come to Adelaide, want to take in a tour, or they'll pick up a copy of the book and give themselves a self-guided tour as well. And certainly, I pretty regularly get contacted about, hey, I'm coming in July. When do you have something on? So it's nice to know that this sort of thing is really helping drive that. It also helps drive people sharing their own information and stories as well. And so much of what I've able to share through these tours is gleaned from conversations from people who've either worked in these buildings or lived in these houses or worked with these architects. And almost every tour, there's someone who comes along with a great sort of extra little story to tell. Just recently I did one where the architect Jim Ward came along, and he designed the extraordinary Bureau of Meteorology in Kent Town, which really sadly has just been demolished quite recently. And it's just absolutely wonderful to get that firsthand. And then out of that, I've connected him with people who are going to preserve all the plans and drawings of that building, which he was probably otherwise going to toss out because he didn't really have anything else to do with them. So yeah, the online aspect of it is really, really wonderful to combine that with obviously the physical and getting out and about as well. Certainly more than 6,500 followers across Facebook and Instagram. And over the last sort of couple of years, this sort of content has been viewed by more than 200,000 people. So regularly trying to post, different buildings and share that information as well. And as I say, a great way to sort of bring people into the city. I guess, why do I care so much about this period of architecture? Well, I guess I thought I could share with you maybe 5 of my favourite examples and maybe dive a little deeper on each of those and spend maybe a minute on each of those before finishing up. So the first one here is not far from here, is the wonderful Deep Acres Apartments on Melbourne Street, just literally around the corner on Melbourne Street, designed by Jack McConnell of Claridge, Hassell and McConnell from 1939 and completed in 1942. Jack McConnell, originally from Melbourne, came out to Adelaide in the late 30s to work on this and also the Bank of New South Wales building on the corner of North Terrace and King William Street, where 2KW is. And certainly he was a big figure of building an appreciation and awareness of modernist architecture. So the owner of this land and the commission of this work was a woman, Jennifer Jolly, and she commissioned what would become one of Australia's most significant early modernist apartment buildings as a source of rental income and provide accommodation for her daughter. And so this was McConnell's first independent design as a partner in the firm. And it comprised 14 1- and 2-bedroom flats and a separate 3-bedroom townhouse and private garden for Jolly's daughter. And it was arranged in a J-shaped block facing Melbourne Street, and all the living rooms and master bedrooms facing into this lovely central garden. The crisp, it's actually very pale blue. I know it looks white, but it's a very, very pale blue coloured building. It has turquoise coloured steel frame casement windows, the low pitch roof, sun decks and laundries and clotheslines and thing above the rear garages, all really exemplify a very early approach to European modernism. So a real change from the pitched roofs and that sort of thing. It was very much about looking to the future. And inside there were these wonderful uncluttered layouts with built-in cabinets and swing-out ironing boards and hatches for the delivery of firewood and milk and bread and that sort of thing to really suit a modern sort of changing lifestyle. Wonderfully preserved and appreciated by those who live there. And it's just absolutely fantastic to see such a snapshot of a really early form of modernism, which I think is actually one of the most significant in Australia, just thriving there on Melbourne Street. Fast forwarding a little bit to 1956, this building landed like a rocket into Palmer Place in North Adelaide, designed as the Walkley residence, designed for the architect Gavin Walkley, who was a great educator at Adelaide Uni as well. But he was humble enough to decide to go up a level to the great Robin Boyd to design this. So rather than doing it himself, Robin Boyd was one of the most significant practitioners and advocates for modernist architecture based out in Melbourne. And he designed that here in 1955 and it was completed in 1956. The 2-storey steel frame building really exemplifies these very modern house ideas and materials. So it really is literally your glass cube. The accommodation is contained upstairs in a rational kind of box, and it almost floats over the glazed living areas below. And Walkley designed a lot of the fixtures and fittings inside. Really clever use of space, where it's a relatively narrow block, and so a way to sort of bring light into the house was to have a sort of narrower lower area and then a larger upper area that would really bring in natural light and so on to the house. The other great part of this building is its interiors that were designed by the Sydney-based Marion Hall Best, who she and herself was a real pioneer of one of the first fully fledged interior designers of the post-war movement, based out of Sydney, very, very flamboyant. And she was the same year that this house was completed, she gave a lecture here in Adelaide on interior design at the 6th Australian Architectural Convention in Adelaide, which Walkley was the chairman of the committee. So all these things were sort of coming together at that time, and 1956 was certainly a real landmark year with this house, with a major exhibition of this kind of architecture in Botanic Park as well, and with John Chappell starting very regular newspaper columns on modernist architecture as well. I think in Adelaide, some of the best and most interesting modernist buildings are our churches, and they're absolutely everywhere. There was an absolute boom in post-war church building, particularly once building restrictions were lifted in the late 40s and early 50s. And so by the mid to late 50s and all the way through to the early 70s, there was an absolute boom, and something like 650 new churches were built in over a couple of decades, and almost every suburb has one. This is one of the most extraordinary ones at St David's Anglican Church on Glimburn Road in Burnside, near the Feathers Hotel, designed by Stuart Game. Stuart Game is probably a classic example of a name that's largely been lost to history and many people just wouldn't remember, but a wonderful architect of this time, an incredible artist as well, and also designed a fabulous house in Beaumont. And this one came about through an exchange of land between the church, the Burnside Council and the Burnside School. for the church to be built to accommodate a rapidly growing parish, and it really is a swooping, striking design. Featuring almost everything a lot of people love about this period, like exposed brick and this incredible, dramatic, hyperbolic paraboloid saddle roof. So that means it curves in both directions. It curves both sort of, to the latitude and the longitude, as it were, with this beautiful laminated timber. Absolutely incredible building, and murals and light fixtures and all sorts of things designed by the architect as well, in absolutely cracking good original condition as well. So and the people who run the church certainly know what they've got and appreciate it, and it's not all that hard. The door's often open, so it's not often hard to wander in and have a bit of a look around and appreciate it. The noted religious sculptor, the Czech emigre Walter Marek, produced a beaten copper wall plaque of St David, and he and a number of emigres from Eastern Europe did a lot of this kind of work in churches, like wonderful murals and motifs and that sort of thing there as well. The next one that's worth a look as well is the wonderful former Reserve Bank of Australia, which is in Victoria Square, and this was designed by the Commonwealth Department of Works, so the federal government architects, as well as Professor Rolf Jensen, who was the University of Adelaide's first chair in architecture, and I understand a quite controversial and divisive figure at times. People I know who've sort of been taught by him said he had very strong opinions on lots of things. Apparently he rallied his class together one day and gave them a 1-hour diatribe on how terrible the Sydney Opera House was, and then they were told to discuss. They sort of awkwardly tried to agree with him, but I think most people would think that's ludicrous. So this was a really distinctive showcase of Australian materials and technology and art in almost every aspect of it, and it really was there to represent Australia's growing confidence on the world stage by providing a building like this. The eastern and western facades have a slight concave curvature to them to relieve any kind of sense of boxiness to the building as well. And these materials go everywhere. So, for example, they looked for a suitable South Australian marble, and including an amazing green marble from Carrickalinga, but there wasn't enough of it to use on this building, so they brought in this sort of grey Wombian marble from New South Wales to give it such a beautiful appearance. The other really distinctive couple of features are this remarkable sort of floating ceiling at the top, and also this protruding plinth at the bottom on the first and second floors, a wonderful aluminium pattern grille known as a brise soleil that provides shade, but whilst also letting light in, but also a decorative element as well. Not pictured here, but right on the ground floor is an amazing work of art by Norma Redpath, a sculpture called Immortal Warrior, that would be easy to walk past every day, and in fact it was exhibited at the Australian Pavilion at the 1967 World Expo in Montreal, so it's had an incredible history, and that was, for anyone who's into design, that was a really incredible expo. And then the last one I'll just speak of before finishing up is I guess, an example of brutalism here. And brutalism is not about these buildings being a bit brutal, it's about the concrete. And it derives from the French term béton brut, which is the description of the kind of rough, unfinished concrete that is often the hallmark of these kind of buildings. And Adelaide is full of these kind of brutalist buildings that use this rough, unfinished concrete. This particular one I love. It's the Australian Mineral Foundation that's in Glenside in Conyngham Street, designed by Antonis Lapsus of Cheeseman, Dolly, Naylor and Raffin in the early 1970s. Certainly a wonderful example of brutalism, and it was part of a campus to support South Australia's burgeoning resources sector, and that led to the establishment of this one and the Mineral Science Centre as well, and a number of those kind of buildings. The grounds were landscaped by Robin Hill, and really this love of concrete was based on Antonis Lapsus visiting Japan in 1971 to research the use of architectural concrete, and that brought back this sort of fresh inspiration. To finish up, I won't linger on it, but I do feel what I've been doing with Modernist Adelaide brings a lot of social benefits to the city, obviously providing really accessible tours and information to people. That's more than 2,000, hopefully building a bit of a public appreciation for this kind of architecture that hopefully will encourage heritage preservation and adaptive reuse, a source of heritage tourism as well for actually bringing people into the city in ways that they might do in other places, using technology to build a strong community, and also collaborating with lots of organisations, be that sort of Rotary or lots of different festivals and so on as well. You know, dozens and dozens of reviews talking about how much they've enjoyed these tours and really seen their city in a really, really different light. And finally, a quick plug, I've got an exhibition on at the moment in the City Library in Francis Street, which is a collaboration between myself and the City of Adelaide Archives. So it's sort of sharing some of my photographs of this period of architecture and also some amazing ones like this of the Adelaide Pavilion, so the old pavilion in the park in South Parklands in its heyday, from the City of Archives collection. So thank you, and certainly very happy to sell you a book later on if you're interested. Thank you very, very much. Cheers. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right. Do we have any questions for Stuart? No, you. Who's going first? All right, David.
Thank you, Stuart. Obviously, I think a few people probably want to now go on some walking tours. When's the next walking tour?
Yeah, the next one's on the 19th of May. They're generally about monthly, and they're always advertised. It's just modernistadelaide.com. So if you go there, the next events are always up on there. But yes, the next one will be on the 19th of May.
Florian?
So I would be curious, is there any influence on on contemporary, like on architecture right now? So it's like, I think if I remember correctly, I read somewhere about the new hotel that's going to be built above the post office that's seemingly inspired by whatever 1950s. But are there any projects that have been recently completed or will be completed soon that actually take up that kind of like modernist architecture, kind of some sort of style?
Yeah, I think there are quite a lot, and I think, you know, to your point, Simon, I think in a way modernism is back a bit. I think after a period where it was definitely out of touch and out of taste, and you know, we had postmodern buildings like the Maya Centre, for example, and you know, a realisation that some of the rational orthodoxy of this didn't always work brilliantly in practice in some instances. I think it's absolutely back. So, you know, I'd look at right next to the GPO, the building that BHP are based in at the moment, you know, on Franklin Street, classic modernist tower, very simple curtain wall, not a lot of adornment on it. You know, to me that looks, you know, a really, really classic example of that. You know, some people are designing houses a little bit in this sort of style as well. So it's certainly, I think that appreciation is definitely coming back and becoming more appreciated. Yeah.
How's it going with getting heritage listing, like in 18th century buildings, you know, Art Deco and yours? Is there legislation going through to protect them?
Not specifically, and it's a really difficult one. The conversation usually turns to this pretty quickly. And look, I'd say I'm definitely no planning, law, heritage kind of expert at all. But I think, you know, the challenge, I think, with heritage protections is getting that balance between, you know, giving people freedom, you know, to develop if so, but also really protecting the ones that are the key, you know, most important examples. And it's not easy to get a building heritage listed. And being a really beautiful example of its time is not enough. It needs to meet very, very strict criteria of being truly unique, either as a building or for what it contributed to the community and that sort of thing at the time. People that were in it and that sort of thing as well. I think hopefully, I guess for me the other part of preservation though is through appreciation. And so, you know, why leave it to the lawmakers to preserve these buildings? I think the more people actually understand and appreciate these buildings from whatever era and actually think a bit more creatively about how they could incorporate what's gone before, that to me is the real future, rather than it being purely about a legislative kind of thing. An example of that would be something like the Queen's Theatre, Her Majesty's Theatre, I think is a great example of that on Grote Street, where effectively that is a brand new theatre complex, but by retaining that beautiful facade and being respectful of how the whole rest of it has been designed inside, I think they've managed to achieve the owner's desire to have a contemporary state-of-the-art facility whilst preserving a heritage kind of feel to it. And that's not the answer all the time, but I do wish a lot of developers could be just a bit more creative with how they might incorporate the character of what's already there.
One more. Zing, thank you.
Thank you very much for a most informative talk. I was just wondering whether the office that my firm was and still is there was the old IPAC headquarters in Glen Osmond Road. It's heritage listed after the Frank Lloyd Wright inspired Japanese period, quite specific. Is that actually in the book?
It is, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is, and a really, really extraordinary example from that period, and quite different in the style of organic architecture, which was less about the steel and glass and more about the sort of stone and earthy kind of elements. And yeah, it is in the book. It's absolutely wonderful, as is a house in Medindi designed by the same architect. Yeah, it's a fabulous building. Nice to see protected. Yeah.
Any more? One more?
Thank you, Stuart. Probably more a comment than anything. Having lived in Adelaide for many years and now been in Canberra for 4, I discovered that wonderful word brutalist. And it just impresses me so much in the ACT. There's just so much architecture over there that's just got that sort of Adelaide concept. Similarly, a lot of the homes, and having shared a house with an architect many years ago who decided to buy something in St George's because of who built it or who designed it, which doesn't come to my recollection now, but there are a lot of similarities to Adelaide and to the ACT. I just wonder whether there's someone like you over there in Canberra that can teach me a lot more.
Absolutely. There's even better than that. There's 3 amazing women who run Canberra Modern that I definitely commend to you. And they're doing just the same thing as what I'm doing with tours and open houses and that kind of thing. And they've got a good website that has a good self-guided tour of some of the top, maybe the top 10 or 20, and particularly through places like ANU, but all around the city. And yeah, they're doing a wonderful job. Yeah, definitely recommend Canberra Modern. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good. Just stay there a sec. I think that's it. I'll just finish quickly with my memory of Professor Rolf Jensen when I was studying. He gathered everybody together in the architectural faculty into a big hall and told everyone how disgusted he was with their dress and their attire. And from that point on, rubberoid beach footwear was banned. And that's the way he described it. Okay, Stuart, many thanks for the delivery today, and I'm sure there'll be lots of people looking up as they walk through the streets, and hopefully no accidents or anything in the process. But thank you very much for your time. It was a wonderful talk, and I'd like to present you with our Certificate of Appreciation, which states that a donation has been made on your behalf to some local community and youth projects for us.
Thank you very much.